There are many things that Germans and Americans do, just in different ways, but there are also some things that Germans do that Americans, well, just do not do. Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. I am Donnie, and along with my wife Aubrey, we are two Americans currently living in Germany and sharing all of our experiences living and traveling throughout Europe. One of our main goals of living in Germany was to learn a different world perspective from a different culture, and that often has meant that we have found things that Germans do that we simply just don't do where we are from. Some of these things have been learned in awkward ways, as a social setting looked exactly like one we are used to in the US, but then suddenly the Germans around us did something that made us stumble right as we got comfortable, and we were reminded that we truly are living in a foreign country. Or we learned that there are some things that we would get ridiculed for doing in the US that in Germany, simply everybody does. So we thought it would be fun to share 4 things that we have stumbled upon in the nearly 3 years that we have lived in Germany that maybe Germans wouldn't even realize are unique to them or are social taboos in another country. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about today in our video. Getting out of our cultural rut. Germans say what? We are originally from a state in the southern US called Oklahoma and now live in the southwestern German state of Rheinland-Pfalz. Both of these places have their own unique subcultures that may not be representative of the two countries as a whole. Therefore, let me know your individual experiences with these things in the comments below and where you are from. And let's just remember, just because one place does something one way and another place does it another way doesn't always mean there are rights and wrongs, maybe just simply different ways of doing things. There are surprisingly more differences between the experience of going to restaurants in the US and restaurants in Germany than you would notice at first glance. But one of the very first differences is in making reservations, or not making reservations. You see, whenever we want to go out to eat with some of our German friends, one thing they always mention is, I can call ahead and make us a reservation. In the US, of course, you could also make reservations at restaurants, but this typically isn't the norm unless you have a really big group and it would be better to give the restaurant a heads up. It is a special occasion at a fancy restaurant or some other very specific circumstance. So when our German friends offer this on, say, a Tuesday night for a general hangout, we always find it a little funny they feel the need to make a reservation. Now, there is nothing in Germany that says you must make a reservation at a restaurant, even though it does seem this is much more of a German tendency than an American one. Just like there is nothing in the US that says you can't make reservations. But what I think that drives this cultural difference is our dining differences. I have read approximately 3.6 trillion comments about how much Germans hate the dining experience in the US because they constantly felt like they were being shooed out of a restaurant by the staff as they try and turn over tables. And I have talked in our videos about how I often feel like a prisoner at German restaurants as I want to leave, but I have to try and wave down a waiter to finally come over and let me pay to leave. But because Americans tend to eat and move on quickly, this allows for us just to show up to a restaurant and get a table, or wait a short time and one will become available, eliminating the need for reserving one in advance in many cases. Whereas in Germany, because people stay at a table for a lot longer, if you show up to a restaurant and all the tables are full, you would most likely have to wait a lot longer before a table becomes available, making it make a lot more sense to make a reservation ahead of time. And this difference seems literally built into both cultures, as the architecture of American and German restaurants are typically different. For example, US restaurants will typically have a small front room with benches and chairs that is known as the waiting area. And when you arrive to a US restaurant, you would let the hostess know you are there, how many people are with you, and then he or she will tell you how long the wait is, and you will sit in the waiting area until they call you to a table. German restaurants most often do not have any sort of waiting area like this, and you either are immediately seated, you have a reservation, or you will just go to another restaurant if the one you want is full. Speaking of restaurants and eating, there's one thing that Germans do what seems like before every meal that Americans don't do, and that is wishing each other guten Appetit right as they are about to start eating. Guten Appetit translates to, wait, bon appetit isn't English. Good appetite? That doesn't make sense. Ah, There it is. Enjoy your meal. Guten Appetit literally translates to good appetite, which really doesn't make any sense in English, so this would never be said. So why was the main translation French? Well, in the absence of having this phrase in English, we have quasi-adopted the French version of bon appetit, but this is usually said kind of sarcastically or in fancy restaurants who are trying to play up their fanciness by saying random phrases in French, but it is definitely not a regular phrase said. If anything, Americans would say that last translation, enjoy your meal, but that is not a required standard part of a meal. Most often, this phrase will really only be said by waiters to a table at a restaurant when they have brought them their food, and that's pretty much it. So, besides just phrasal differences, what's the main difference we have noticed in Germany? We have really noticed that saying Guten Appetit is a staple saying at a German dining table no matter the setting. Whenever we are eating with Germans in their homes, they seem to always say Guten Appetit to each other, and this is the signal that it is time for everybody to start eating. Of course, just like Germans do, we always wait until everybody has their food to eat, but we have found ourselves at a German dining table ready to pick up our forks and start eating, and then we are taken off guard by everybody saying this phrase, and we have to stop ourselves before taking our first bite, remember to say it as well, and then start eating. So this isn't a huge difference, but with Germans it does seem like a much more common and pervasive cultural part of a meal regardless of where you are, and for Americans it is more specifically reserved for mainly between wait staff and restaurant goers. Now there are also other variations in Germany that we have heard, like Mahlzeit, which also the direct translation doesn't make much sense in English as it means meal time. But let me know, do you have any other phrases that you say before eating to others? Real quick guys, I want to take a moment to thank all of our patrons over on our Patreon for supporting our channel. Seriously, what you guys do is such a huge support to our channel, and I really want you to know how much I appreciate it. Also, if all of you watching would take a moment to hit those like and subscribe buttons, it would mean a lot. Now, back to the video. Just like English adopted bon appetit as a phrase sometimes said by Americans, Germans have also adopted a foreign word that they use all the time, but unlike bon appetit, the word picked up by Germans would never be said by Americans in fear of looking like a pretentious prick, and that is ciao.
Ciao. Right? Ciao. Okay. I say ciao because I'm fancy from Tallahassee.
Wow. Why don't we say ciao to the impressions?
Okay.
Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao.
That of course was a clip from the popular American workplace comedy, The Office, where they perfectly summed up the unusual stigma the word ciao has developed in the US. Overall, in many ways, saying foreign words randomly in everyday life is a great way to be ridiculed in the US, and in particular, ciao has a very bad reputation for this. It is just viewed as you are trying way too hard to be cool or show how classy or cultured you are. I would probably say that most Americans are well aware that Germans say Auf Wiedersehen to say goodbye, but they have no idea that more day to day, the casual way of saying goodbye in standard German is Tschüss. So not only were we surprised not to hear Auf Wiedersehen everywhere we went when we first moved here and started learning German, but we also were shocked to see just how often we hear ciao along with the other German words for goodbye. Now, before I get in trouble, I just want to say that Germans are not pretentious pricks for saying ciao. That is just the stereotype in the US if Americans say it. In fact, it has gotten so ingrained in German culture that you can find the Italian word Germanized and spelled this way at times. Even with having lived in Germany for nearly 3 years now, and with hearing ciao becoming so normal to us, after 29 years of it being ingrained in us that Americans don't say ciao, I have not brought myself to say it even once over here. Maybe something I should work on. One thing every foreigner in Germany YouTube channel talks about as a shock after moving to Germany is the reliance on the use of traditional snail mail still, as opposed to more modern electronic means of communication over here. Now, I'm not talking about that in this video, and that stereotype also can make it seem like, for example, in the US, sending letters isn't done at all anymore. But this definitely isn't the case. There are specific instances where Americans do post letters, which brings me to an interesting difference, and that is how we send letters. In the US, if I wanted to send a letter, I would simply place the letter I want to send in my home mailbox, raise a little red flag to alert that a letter is in the mailbox, and the mailman, as he or she makes their rounds, would grab my letter from the mailbox and deliver it for me. Whereas in Germany, I must leave my house, go find a mail collection box, and drop the mail in a centralized mailbox that everybody in the area uses that is emptied all at once by the mailman. To be clear, centralized mailboxes do also exist in the US, but you don't have to go to one to send a letter. Now, in my personal opinion, but in no way am I ready to die on this hill because it isn't a subject I am truly all that passionate about, I do find that dropping a letter in your mailbox and having a mailman just pick it up from your home, since they are making the rounds every day anyways, is a simpler system, and it does surprise me, with as much more mail Germans seem to send than Americans, that they do require people to find the centralized box and go there to drop off their letters. But let me know your thoughts. If you're German, would you like this system better? To see who made it this far into the video, the random question of the week is Schlager music. Are you a fan of this genre? Thanks so much for watching, guys. Be sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons, and we will see you in our next video. Ciao! Guten Appetit translutes that with as much more mail Germans before I get in trouble, I want to say that Germans are not whoops.